Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Nuria Jaume Pascual, as Betty Jean said, and today I'm going to present about a study that my team conducted on women of color in undergraduate engineering education. And if we have time, I also want to share a little bit of the findings that we got on women of color in the workplace. So I work at an organization called Turk, and we work to improve mathematics, science, and technology education. We're a nonprofit, and we receive mostly funding from the National Science Foundation and also some foundation monies and contract money sometimes. We do research, evaluation, and curriculum development, and the main office is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but it has employees throughout 18 different states in the US and in Canada. I personally am in Athens, Georgia. This is my team. The principal investigator of our project is Mia Ong. She's been doing work on women of color in STEM education and careers for 20 years. I've been working with her for the last 6-ish, 7. Lisette Torres-Gerald, Christina Bibi, and Audrey Martinez Gudapakam. And we work together on projects on similar topics. This specific research project, it's called Engineering Beyond the Double Bind. And what we were looking at was where the factors that were affecting the experiences, participation, and advancement of women of color in engineering from their education in college through their careers. But today I'm going to present mostly on the undergraduate education research that we did. When we talk about women of color, we talk about Black, African American, Asian American, Latinx, Hispanic, Native American, Alaska Native, Pacific Islander. And we include Asian and Asian American women because even though they are not underrepresented, they do suffer from discrimination. And once they are in the workplace, they do not advance in their careers in the same ways that you see other groups advancing. So we consider them to be discriminated and underrepresented at the higher levels anyway, so we include them in our work. So what did we do in this study? This is what we call a systematic thematic synthesis, which is a method where we bring together literature about a specific topic, we bring it together and we develop what we call meta findings. So this is a collection of a lot of individual studies, and then we see the things that they have in common. So it's systematic, which means that we use methods that we want, that need to be replicable, so other people can look at our methods and do it. Comprehensive, so we're trying to get all the literature on that topic as much as we can. We can never find absolutely everything because we're not infallible, but we try to achieve that goal. We use thematic analysis, which is a way of analyzing data where we use theory, and we use the theory to analyze the data, and then we use the data itself to kind of like tell us what topics come up, and then we bring those two together to create themes that tell us what are the main things happening. And then what we do is we synthesize. So we do not count things, we don't aggregate in that way. What we do is that we interpret what we are finding so that we develop new understandings of what the literature is telling us. Why do we do systematic thematic synthesis? Because it allows us to find meta findings. So in qualitative research, which is mostly what I do, there's the criticism that we never have big numbers in the research. You may have a study with 15 people or 10 people or even 2 people. So what we do is that we bring together a lot of small studies, and that brings together a much bigger number of participants. It allows us to reproduce the work for people who want, hold on, there's people to admit. So people can reproduce the findings, and we identify gaps in the literature so we can focus our research in those gaps, and we develop recommendations. We have a new project where we teach the metasynthesis methods, and this is an overall view of what the kinds of methods that we use. This is the process. Like, we set up the metasynthesis idea. So we create a synthesis section, a question, what do we want to learn? We then decide on a theoretical framework, what is going to guide our work. Then we develop a list of criteria so that we can decide what counts as part of our data set and what doesn't count. We look for the best search engines that we can use for the kinds of work that we're interested in. And then we put together search strings to do our searches. Then we look for the literature, and we do all these things here. We do the searches, we filter the findings using the criteria that we developed earlier to create a start set, which is a number of studies that fulfill our criteria here. Then we snowball them. We do forward snowballing, which means that we look at what papers have cited them, so they're papers that are related, and backward snowball. We look at the papers that they cite, so their bibliography, and then we do the same filtering process to have the complete set of literature. And then we do all the analysis using deductive and inductive coding and themes development and all that stuff that I told you earlier. If doing this kind of work is interesting to you, we now have an NSF project where our job is to teach people these methods. And in the summer, we are going to be doing a workshop series. It's going to be a webinar type of thing. And we're working with Dr. Felicia.
What kind of timeline?
Oh, someone is very loud. Can you mute yourself? We're working with Felicia Jefferson, Dr. Felicia Jefferson from Fort Valley State College, and we're going to be doing 4 sessions teaching this method. So if anyone is interested, my email is going to be at the end, and you can email me. And we can see if we can get you into the workshop. So talking about this specific project, our findings on undergraduate women of color in engineering education. These are the 4 main themes. The first one is interest, motivation, and self-efficacy. Second one is social pain, and those are the sub-themes that we've developed. We'll look at them individually. Then navigation, how people find their way through a system. And then the support entities, the people and organizations and programs that support this women of color. So the first theme, interest, motivation, and self-efficacy. What we have found that the literature says is that women of color who get into engineering undergraduate education have a very strong pre-college interest and academic preparation in STEM. A lot of them talk about like math or science being their favorite subject, being really good, being one of the smart ones, and all that. Then there's the enjoyment, prestige, and the anticipated financial rewards of a career in engineering. And we see a lot of, in the enjoyment part of this, people who really like tinkering, they like solving puzzles, and that's how they first got interested in engineering. Also self-efficacy, which is the belief in one's own ability to succeed or accomplish a task. So they are people who believe that they have these abilities to do well, and they are very resilient about following those interests and being successful. However, there's a lot of lack of self-efficacy. And sometimes it's the opposite of the initial interest of, that interest and that love of math and science, that they have a perception that they don't have the academic ability to succeed in this. They have feelings of not belonging. And as we will see, those feelings of not belonging do not stem from them. They stem from the people around them who make them feel that way. And we will see some examples. And then there are some behaviors that have negatively affected their engineering pathways. Sometimes they are so willing to redo coursework that holds them back. They want to have perfect grades. They want to do so well that they are actually self-sabotaging. They question their choice of entering engineering. They underestimate their own academic abilities, and they self-sabotage, as I said. However, self-efficacy is not fixed. So there are things that they do or that they can do, like identifying their strengths in mathematics and science. They can build their engineering skills through hands-on experiences where they can apply the things that they learn, like in internships. They can, if they have the opportunity to compete against strong students from other universities, that can be a very motivating opportunity. Also, if they are able to have supportive relationships from friends, peers, mentors, program coordinators, and all that, that can really help in boosting that belief in themselves. And building networks in engineering through organizations, internships, and things like that is very helpful. And also having teacher support and role models. And here is an example of a woman of color who she's a Black woman in this case, who talks about her experience of, how she lives her self-efficacy and how others influence it. So she said, you encounter certain different types of people who will ask you, oh, what are you majoring in school? And when you tell them you're in engineering, for me, they look at it and they're like, oh, wow, you're actually trying to do that? I can still make it, like, as long as I stay focused and, keep going forward and not let anybody pull me down by the negativity. So as you can see, comments like that may seem benign, you're actually trying to do that actually is telling the other person that you don't believe that they can do that. And it can be, it can have a pretty negative impact on people, and they need to have their own tools to be able to deal with that. That would be a microaggression. Social pain. So social pain is when a person experiences social pain, which is rejection, feeling left out, or feeling like one does not belong. It triggers a neural reaction similar to a reaction of physical pain. So a physiological alarm goes off, interrupts current tasks, and focuses attention on mitigating the pain source. The reaction is distressing, attention-getting, and disruptive. So if you're trying to accomplish a task and you experience social pain, your energy, your attention goes from the task to paying attention to this distressing situation with another person. And examples of social pain are being the only one. You have a sense of isolation from being the only one. due to the gender or the race, ethnicity of this person, in this case, women of color in engineering. And this is because these environments are populated mostly with white men. So these women experience loneliness, the inkling that they are serving as tokens for their gender and their race, the sense that no one else in their department understands them, having very few professors or other role models who look like them, so they don't have anyone to look up to, and the anxiety that they're being excluded from things like study groups and networks. And we see many, many examples of women of color who end up alone, having to find each other. So they have groups of women of color working together, or other students who may be the only one like themselves, like international students who may be really good at engineering, but they may not speak the language so well, and then they are paired together by default. So here's an example of being the only one. This student from the study by Sonosky said, there's really no one you can talk to that's going to relate with the things that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis as an African-American female in engineering. Also, in addition to being the only one, they find that they are ignored and they are made invisible. So they are being withheld recognition, and this exacerbates the sense of not belonging. White male professors and peers routinely exercise their power to ignore or make invisible women of color in classrooms or study groups. And we have had people be very surprised about this, like how can professors actually do this? But we see this over and over and over and over again. So for example, a woman of color in an engineering classroom may ask a question, but they are ignored, and only that question is addressed if a white male asks it. Then they can be, their contributions are ignored in course or study groups. Women of color are very often assigned ancillary roles like the note taker. So it's like the secretary, right? They are demoting the social status of women of color, and they are negated their intellectual potential. So very often we would find examples where women of color would say that people would tell them, oh, you were accepted at Stanford or wherever because you're a Black woman, and they need that for representation. And she's like, that's interesting because I got straight A's, I'm a member of this and this and the other group. And you know, like it's not that they don't have the intellectual potential, it's just that they are understood to be a, you know, just a token for their gender and race. Here's an example of being ignored and made invisible. This student said, if you had questions or anything asked the question, the teacher would ignore it. But if a white man asked the same question, they would say, okay, that's great. And it was just a lot of slides on how we were treated differently. Then there's stereotype threat and being spotlighted. A stereotype threat is a situational predicament in which a person feels at risk of confirming a negative stereotype. For example, unintelligent, bad at mathematics, not athletic, about a group of which that person is a member. It causes stress and debilitates performance in ways that do not affect members of non-stereotyped groups in the same context. So in a math class, for example, if women are reminded of the stereotype of women are not good at math, they do worse in a math test. If they are not reminded of that stereotype, they will do as well as anybody else. So that would be a stereotype thread. So what happens is that women of color carry the burden of disproving these negative stereotypes about their group's intellectual abilities in engineering. So if people don't expect a Black woman or a Latina woman to be good at math, to be good at solving problems, they have the pressure of having to disprove that. So what they find is that white male colleagues do not carry the same burden of proving themselves. So they don't have that extra pressure, that cognitive burden of having to deal with that at the same time that they need to do well in their engineering tasks. They are being singled out on the basis of their social identity, being women, being of color, or both at the same time, because you can't really disentangle them. You can't stop being a woman and Black. You're always a Black woman if that's your identity. Or a professor calling on a single African-American woman to be the voice for all African-Americans or for all African-American women. And also, obviously, discrimination and harassment. We have seen in the literature that women of color are sexually harassed in the classroom or in departments like in office hours and other academic environments. They are the subject of subtle or overt, sometimes racism or sexism, and their abilities and academic qualifications questioned. Like I explained before of the case of the woman who got accepted at Stanford, they can't believe that she got into Stanford because she's a Latina woman or whatever. So it's a difficult situation to find yourself in. Here's an example of discrimination and harassment. One woman of color engineering student, Terry, who knew she was going to fail a class because her male instructor gave her straight 69s on all her homework and tests. Gorman stated, a score of 69 with sexual undertones and all is not considered the passing grade in engineering. A consistent score of 69 on everything that Terry received somehow felt wrong. As you can imagine, that is, it is very difficult for someone to get the same grade in everything. And the fact that it's a 69, like get into the mind of the woman receiving this grade. It's like, what is this professor trying to do to me? That's one. And then what is in this professor's mind giving a 69 to a student in every single assignment and test? So these are these undertones that women of color need to deal with. And instead of being able to use all their cognitive abilities to solve the engineering problem that they have in front of them, they have to use their cognitive abilities to deal with the social reality of a professor who is conveying this not very positive message to her through the grading that they are, doing toward her. Then there's navigation. Navigation is the ability to maneuver through the social institutions that were not created with communities of color in mind. So what do people do to navigate, to deal with the systems that were not designed with them in mind? So women of color may try to pass as white. They may tolerate the racism by ignoring remarks, and not just racism, also sexism. Just ignore them and act as if they never happened. Ignoring the circumstances that made them feel invisible, modifying their internal dialogue. So they're talking to themselves and saying, I'm not going to pay attention to this, or they don't know any better, or, you know, whatever their internal dialogue might be to be able to deal with this. Practicing self-care, relying on faith and prayer to cope internally with discrimination. So the burden is on the woman herself. Nobody's helping her with this, but she is taking on these ways of dealing with it. And what Brown found is that the strategies were not employed without regret. They will feel things like, I should have snapped back, I should have said this, I should have reported him, you know, all these things that they regret not doing, or that they regret doing, like if they pass as white, or they do other things to deal with this. Then they may feel guilty, they may feel sad, they may feel, you know, a lot of things that, you know, white men don't necessarily need to deal with. Sometimes they do cultural adaptation. They take on the dominant engineering culture through how they speak, how they behave, how they look like, so that they can acclimate to the engineering culture and gain access to the networks or the powerful positions that they need to access to continue in this work that they want to do. So they will change the way they dress. So they will dress in non-feminine ways. They will try to be overtly athletic, or they will strive to reduce emotions and reactions because otherwise they're not taken seriously. And they may do these things to the point of almost being perceived as male, as one of the guys, right? And they also need to be particularly skillful in communicating with their peers to not be perceived as aggressive or as overtly emotional and things like that. Also, they do self-affirmation. So women of color defied opposition to their presence in engineering by choosing cultural self-affirmation with strategies like backtalk, confrontation, resistance to marginalization. So they may, instead of doing all this internalizing of all those things, what they may do is just like confronting people that have humiliated them, standing up for themselves and talking back. Another strategy that we have found that women of color use a lot to navigate is to give back. They want to help people who are struggling like themselves, and they want to contribute to the accomplishments of their race and ethnicity and gender. They want to become role models. They want to volunteer. They want to motivate others to persist in engineering, because they want to increase the number of students who are women of color in the engineering field. And so they do things like community outreach, organizing community events to promote science. And we will see an example now. So this woman in Alonso's study, she's a Latina, and she said, I really like the fact that giving back to the community by doing things like Noche de Ciencias, which is science night, was really something really great that I can involve myself in and also connect with the kids so they can get inspired as much as I got inspired to be an engineer. We have found, let me see, it's 9:56, so I'm going to breeze through this a little bit. We found that families are a very big support system for women of color, especially mothers, and they do things like trying to inspire them to achieve more than they did. You want better for your kids than you were able to get most of the time, making sacrifices to help them through, showing pride in them, providing them with guidance, and sometimes role models if they are in similar careers, showing them that they need to be responsible, and in some cases using spirituality that become emotional tools. An example here was this woman talking about, I think that if I hadn't been so involved in my church back where I grew up and seeing all types of African Americans in various leadership roles, I don't know where I would have been, because again, I saw all the different opportunities and they were always open to discuss or talk to or guide you if you expressed an interest in something. My mom didn't know anything about this, or she didn't have expertise, but she knew would go to church and she would basically say, go talk to such and such so that they can help you. So they used their churches as a networking opportunity where they could get the help that they wouldn't be able to get from their family. Peers are also an important support system, and they help them reinforce their identity as engineers. They provide academic support and they help them figure out how to navigate this inhospitable place called engineering undergraduate education. And they help them support in terms of celebrating their identities culturally. So they would get emotional encouragement, social comfort, celebrate their cultures, and connect over common experiences of rejection. You can imagine that international students who may not speak the language so well or who may look different, and women of color who are from the US but look different from what people expect to see in engineering, they band together and they tell each other their experiences of rejection, and they help each other navigate by supporting each other in all these ways. Also, there are programs, professional organizations like this one, pre-college, community college to college transitions, residential, summer programs, student organizations, all of these things help people, women of color, access peer networks, find self-confidence and motivation to persevere by being leaders or by getting engaged in rewarding activities. They help develop relationships with program and university staff, and a lot of times we found that they talked about these programs as being a home away from home. So this feeling of being like a family was super, super important. What we have found in the workplace, and this is going to be very brief, because we haven't done as detailed work on this as with what I've talked about for undergrads, but you will see that a lot of the themes are similar, but some of them are pretty different in the sense that they encounter social barriers like stereotypes. So the bro culture, you know, if you're not a bro, you do not belong. People hanging out for drinks after work and women are not invited, they're not expected to be there, especially if they're women of color. Their credibility is questioned, they have to prove themselves, which translates into different standards for advancement. So if their credibility is questioned and they have to prove themselves, they have to work twice, 3 times as hard to be able to get to the same place as a white guy who is understood to be, it's a given that he is capable and accredited and has the skills for that. And they have to fragment themselves to belong. They need to not talk about their families, otherwise they're being too emotional or they're not being seen as committed, things like that. And then there are structural barriers such as demographics. There are no people like themselves where they work. They're the only Asian woman, they're the only Native woman, or they're not even people of color in general that they can look up to. And there's a workplace culture where things like stereotypes and questioning credibility are okay and nobody questions them, and they have different standards for advancement, and it's part of the culture and it works fine for them because it's it's in their advantage. We also found supports and strategies for persistence that they use. So again, this self-confidence, this determination and their resilience and their creativity, they rely on that, and they have the initiative to seek professional growth and develop their leadership skills. And socially, they look to give back. As we saw before, giving back is very important because it not only helps them use their skills and their networks, which often benefits them, but also for the benefit of their communities, which is a very important goal for especially women of color. They modify their behaviors, like we have said before, with women of color in undergraduate education, and they look for counter spaces. They nurture community through safe places where they can be themselves and where they can give each other support. They look for places with workplace diversity. So if you want to have more diversity in your workplace, you need to pay attention to who you hire, because that is also help or be a detriment toward bringing in more talent that is diverse. They look for mentoring and managerial support, and they rely on family and friends for this kind of support as well. I have a set of recommendations. I'm gonna breeze through them. So in terms of outreach and recruitment, we recommend that you host workshops and summer courses that introduce women of color to and engage them in engineering, expose them to role models of similar racial and ethnic and gender backgrounds, cultivate mentorships, help them find relationships where they can have someone who can help them and show them the ropes. Hold a special programs for women of color. And it's not about excluding others, but celebrating them. And others can be included in the celebration as well, but first pay attention to them. Creating and maintaining internal safe spaces for women of color. So big organizations, big companies may have employee resource groups. So those are excellent for women of color. Incorporate opportunities to give back in the activities that the company or the organization does. So if you're gonna do outreach to the community, make sure that it includes outreach to communities of color, and then prioritize promotion equity, so that women of color don't need to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard to be able to get to the same places. In terms of retention, to keep women of color, because it's not just about getting them hired, but it's also keeping them in the long run. So hire diverse faculty and staff so people can have role models and mentors who look like them. Train people to be inclusive, and so that they don't make comments like the ones we've seen before. The surprise of a woman of color being at Stanford, or being able to have good grades, or things like that. Be very intent in applying anti-discrimination policies. So things need to be treated equally and using the same policies and not sweep things under the rug. Implement formal and informal supports for women of color, establishing things like mentoring programs that will support them and help them stay in the workplace. Alter the current organizational climate. So if there's a culture of going drinking after work, where a lot of work decisions are made, try to change that so that there are things that happen during work time, or that can involve the entire family, not just the employees and things like that, so that people are not excluded because of family responsibilities. Creates a surrogate family in engineering. So create an environment where people feel welcome and family-like, and support women of color's participation in professional organization and conferences. And that is very important because there are specific conferences for women of color. So it's an opportunity to network and create opportunities for themselves for growth and leadership. And as I mentioned, the mentoring programs. So I've breezed through this. I'm at the end of my presentation. We wanted to thank Betty Jean for contacting me and giving me the opportunity to present to you. And we wanted to thank the National Science Foundation, who has been funding us for quite a long time and allowing us to do this work. Current and prior team members and our partners and advisors who have been key to help us get this work done. If you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. And if you're interested in metasynthesis methods, learning how to do this work with literature, please email me and we can see if you can be in maybe the Fort Valley one or maybe other intensive workshops that we're going to be doing. We're funded through the end of 2023. So we're going to be having methods workshops going on. So please contact me if you're interested. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. If there are no questions, everybody, thank you so much, Miriam, for being with us today and helping us understand some of these issues better that we don't think about. Everybody, I'm about to send an email link, a Zoom link to the next session. I think we're just, at least for the next session, we're going to go with this method since it seems to work for now. So again, thank you for your patience. And Miriam, thanks again. And we wish you well.
Can we ask a question?
Oh yeah, did you have a question, Tim? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just I looked at looking at this from a big picture, like 30,000 feet. But as a professional, I've always just tried to show everybody mutual respect.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the things you're pointing out are kind of that thing. But I do understand also the hurdles people have to go through, personal hurdles and that for some of the things. But as a professional with like 30 years experience, do you look at that as adequate and just giving people mutual respect, or some of the things that you pointed out that give some people some advantages? So I just kind of was getting a feel for what you thought on that.
So personal respect is the starting point. It would be great if we could change how things work with personal respect. The problem is that personal respect is not enough. If you think about the civil rights issues, Black people were supposed to be able to vote since, Black men since what, 1865, and Black women since 1914 or something like that. So, but the struggle to get people to vote is still happening, even though there are other laws. The system needs to change. It's not just about how we treat people individually, it's also how systems treat people and put up those barriers of like, oh, this is the way we do things. Why should we change it if it works for me? Well, it turns out that I'm a white man and systems are designed to work for me. So making the system work for women of color doesn't mean giving them an advantage. It's actually creating a level playing field. It is not giving them an advantage. The current systems are to give them a disadvantage. So it's a very, I understand that it may feel like we're giving them an advantage if we give them mentoring that might not be designed, we're not offering to white guys. But the thing is that they are starting from here, not from here. They have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, to get to where they need to be. So respect is the starting point, and then help leveling the playing field by providing supports that are available to most white people, but are not available to women of color.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, that's a good answer. And then one thing we do, being with GSP, we do math counts, and I've noticed where with that program, it seems like it's becoming very diverse, which I think is really good because, like you said, mathematics, everybody should be able to do mathematics. It's not just for one group of people. So that's a starting point. And I do like your idea too. I know down here in Savannah, they've got like a actual school that promotes engineering. They broke it up where they've got different schools that promote different interests. So that might be something we maybe take a look at too. Like you said, with the mentoring, and then that would help maybe be help us. So I'll put that as something we can do. But I like your answer there, and I appreciate that because, like I said, I always look at things as hey, everybody's equal in my opinion, and everybody can do everything. And I do the personal respect, but I understand where you're coming from. That even looking at it that way, it's not maybe not enough. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, please do things where we can bring people in, and particularly women of color, into science, technology, engineering, math early on, because we need them. And people, I mean, for me also, helping women of color be in careers like engineering, it's not just that the country needs the hands working in this topics, it's also that these are careers that are well paid. So why shouldn't everybody have access to a good livelihood, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, exactly.
So,
okay. Well,
yeah, get them in as early as possible.
Well, thank you. Nice presentation. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Tim.
Are there any other questions?
I think you should move on to the next thing. It's already 10:15, Betty Jean.
Okay, yes, I let our next speaker know we were running a little behind. Everyone who's here online, thank you again for your patience. I had just emailed you all an updated link. So please check your email and let me know if you didn't get that. So thank you again to everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Betty Jean, I'm going to end the session. Is that okay? Yes. Bye.